which I felt at moments that I'm still at the conference where I was last week. There was another conference about media and democracy, and I said, here there is a panel so that would deal with the topic poetry and democracy. So if you were with us, and if you were with Maureen, which was very fluent, too fluent for me to grasp everything. I'm an old man, you were younger, so, and if you have any question, maybe she would be still, after this performance, ready to answer. Is that right?
Sure.
Okay.
Oh, I have a question. You said that the news flash, Americans don't read poetry, and the second that you said that if they do, they wouldn't read the poets that you presented to us. And
some of them.
Well, obviously. What do you think would be the reason for that? Is it because these poets are uncomfortable, or is it because they're just, not known? Because I found it so surprising that you said that the one that received the Pulitzer Prize, it was for the 10th collection of her 10th book, and I've never heard of the poet.
Exactly. A couple of things. One is, I think there's a sociological thing, which I'm sure is true in all. I would make a wager that in most first world neoliberal countries, the reading of poetry, compared to watching TV or movies, etc., it's like there's other stuff to do. That's why, So I also feel, if I know novelists who are very sad that the novel no longer has the same cultural position it used to, say, 50 or 60 years ago, and I sort of like, welcome to my world, getting out the violin. I'm not sorry for you, is what I say to the novelist. Like, whatever. Neither for myself nor for quote poetry have ambitions of like world or readerly domination. So I actually really hate poetry boosters. I'm being very frank. I sort of feel it's like they make it into vitamins.
Sorry.
Oh, and so I think there are very good historical reasons for why it's just not a dominant cultural form, a pervasive cultural form. But in the spaces where it does occur, where you get a more popular registration, and of course there are, amazing moments like Elizabeth Alexander's inaugural poem, a very public moment where people were really focused on a public occasion of poetry. And there are people like, and this will get into our conversation at the panel, how one thinks about it in terms of popularity and all. But the fact is, it's a fairly, so there's just, even the most accessible poets aren't much read. As somebody said yesterday, John Ashbery was not accessible, but he's very well known. If he sells 8,000 copies, he's in, poet heaven. That's amazing. Maya Angelou might sell a ton of books, but there are maybe like 5 people who sell a lot. This is separate from the issue of the complexity, difficulty, or rebarbative nature of some of the poets I quoted today. So I actually was on the Pulitzer panel that we set up. Armentrout was one name. We sent up 3 names. You don't choose one. You send up 3 to the Pulitzer people, and then they choose. And they chose among our 3 Armentrout. And we were very happy with all 3 of our nominees. And they chose her. It shows you that one thing I think is there are many, many people who are very strong writers writing in several idioms. Some are writing in a very like an oral speech idiom. They're wonderful. Others are writing in a super intellectual, complex idiom that most people aren't going to want to wander into anyway. And the fact is, a lot of people turn to poetry for solace. And if you're looking for solace, to get clover bashing your head in about Lake Capital, it's like, that's not what most people want from poetry necessarily, but the poets will do whatever the poets want to do. I think, they have their own. So I'm slightly evading your question, but
no, I was thinking more in terms, of school curriculums, like how am I as a person poet if I don't venture out on my own? So supposed to get hold of that? You know, like, so are
It's
they
a great,
being
yeah.
taught at school in America?
Well, I think that one question there would be, what are the prevailing anthologies? And I gave you snippets from poets who, most of them are younger, 35 to 45 years old, and most of them are just entering anthologies now. Armentrout's older, Seidel is older, probably, I think both might be in the Norton or a new Norton anthology. I mean, people don't want to teach 12-year-olds about, I had my face sliced off and my penis and tentacles about it, you know, but I also feel like you're teaching them Robert Frost, it's like Recipe for Darkness and Despair, you know, so that question of what people think they're doing when they teach poetry is another question. So.
Yes. I was very struck by what you said in connection with the Dickman poem, that it was a tactic and possible weakness. I found this coming to a lot of poetry, not just American, and even like art exhibitions as well. You go to a gallery and you try to work out what the artist is trying to communicate to you, and you find out that consumer society is bad, American foreign policy is not nice, and you come to the same message at the end. And I feel that it's like this irony that leads a lot of poets and artists too,
right.
is a kind of aesthetic dead end for them. And it makes me hunger for perhaps a poet who's going to celebrate American empire. And the last one I can think of, that's what I was going to say, George Bush was a great guy, much misunderstood. I mean,
You and Neil Ferguson,
Yeah.
Well, this Seidel is your man, but Seidel would not. Seidel is very. His persona is militantly un-PC, unpolitically correct. So, but he also he's also, when you actually get through all of his hostilities and satire, he's an old school liberal. You know, he believes in. He was really happy about Obama, for example. And but I also feel like, look, I feel like there's a kind of set of pieties, sort of ideological pieties that it's no surprise that most poets, artists, intellectuals skew towards the left liberal side of things in the U.S. And what's interesting, I mean, it is really hard to the kind of loathing from some wings of the right of any kind of complexity or sentience. I mean, so it's very tricky, right? So I think these are two separate issues. One is there is actual profound hostility to intellectual and aesthetic vitality in some precincts of American culture. So on the other hand, there's the freedom of a person to think and make art, and there's a lot of just kind of crappy, like, welcome to consumerism, as you say, bad, you know, or let's revel ironically in it. And so what's interesting, I think somebody like Dickman is trying to do a both-and thing and sort of navigate, he's trying to do more registration than a critique. It's sort of like, let's catalog, let's locate. But I agree, that's why, this is one of the things I'm interested in. If you take on these topics, you end up in this sort of rut. You end up in a kind of ideological or intellectual rut, and I do think it's a real issue.
I mean, the last person I can think of who was, right-wing, it was Eeyore Amons, who was a very complex poet, but was happily and cheerfully Republican, celebrated American imperial values in the middle of the Cold War. I mean, he has a poem of praise for the atom bomb and America's ability to produce that. But that's an example of somebody going in the other direction, but yet aesthetically challenging, and I think just a really fascinating poet.
Yeah, but I also think the capacity to think all that was a historical moment. I mean, I think one way to read people like Lowell and is that they're Cold War poets, whatever their supposed dissident relation to, Nixon, etc. These are Cold War poets, and I don't think an Ammon sensibility would be writing poems honoring George Bush. I just don't. I think that was a historical moment where it was possible to hold certain tensions, and I think that it's very hard, to imagine where that space would be. I'd be very interested to see it too. The last thing I want to hear is another knee-jerk liberal poem, or another complex knee-jerk liberal poem. Or another like Brooklyn hipster poem about my supposed, slightly ironical relation to Google. So it's like one can do that very quickly, but I don't think that. I think poets with a little more historical consciousness actually do more interesting things. I mean, poets who are either know something about Rome, or know something about Greece, or know something about Central Europe, you get some more textured inquiries into some of these questions.
I can put you on the mailing list, internet mailing list of Tea Party.
I've done it.
No, I mean, with my reputation, someone decided that I will be on their mailing list. I have at least 6, 7 messages a day now that I have to sort of delete, But someday I felt strong enough and opened it. And, this was not unfamiliar to me. This was exactly the language of the communist 1950s, of the Cold War, with the vulgarity and everything, and the praise for actors as presidents, criminals as presidents, etc. And of course saying that there is a fraud president in the White House now, and that is all the message, about Obama. So, and this is part of the culture. I mean, there are how many? 63 people in the Congress who are now the caucus of the Tea Party. 63. I mean, that is. It's not a lofty matter, really. Okay. Yes.
It's interesting to see. I really liked a lot of the poets that you included, and interesting to see the different strategies that American poets are using to kind of confront the American moment. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about strategies that you see American poets using, or different reactions that they're having to the fact that, as you said, nobody really reads poetry. And this image you gave about the American poets being the twitching antennae in the cloud, in the information cloud. How do you see poets reacting to that?
Well, those are two issues, right? One thing you can see is internal diversification, such that you get many more little camps, so when you get poets writing for other poets more than for, and some people bemoan this. It's why aren't poets writing for a broader public, or why is their work so esoteric or difficult, or so there can be, and so you could say that some poets might expect themselves released from the burden of a public, right? You could say that that's been a really bad thing for American poetry, some strains of American poetry that becomes very inward and marginal, lots of game playing, but not much aesthetic payoff. But I do think that I don't know. Look, Emily Dickinson, who I feel like really serious writers write for eternity, not just for their peer group. People, you can argue about that, but so I also think that I landed on people who were particularly interested in, but I wasn't even searching for it. I kept finding these things about either the web or TV or so. And there's a really interesting. Stephen Bird has an interesting essay about younger poets and sort of what's in their consciousness and the historical shifts. People who were born in the '60s and after, growing up with, say, pop culture and TV just as part of your ambient horizon. And so a lot of, instead of writing about Persephone and Odysseus or having that kind of mythic toolkit, they're like Batman, punching the nuts, right? And there's a way in, the critic Helen Bendler has said something like she doesn't really review a lot of younger poets' stuff because basically what's going on in their heads she doesn't have any relation to, which I think is really interesting in several different ways. I'm like, Helen, you could learn some things. And also, I don't think it's that, obviously the nouns are different, but also the sense of, one thing I cut here is that in talking about Dickman and some of these other poets who are, we might call them maximalists, they want to include a lot and jam a lot, and they have a lot of references in their work. It's James Wood famously said about contemporary fiction that there was a strain of it that he called hysterical realism. Maximalist novels with, tons of, data, stuff, information, and chatty, slightly attention deficit, hysterical realism. And I think that one can talk about a certain strain in American poetry as hysterical realism. And maybe Dickman might be on that side of things. And it's interesting, it's hard to know whether, are their poems a symptom of something or are they a diagnosis of something? And I think really strong work is both, but the fate of most of us is just to be period style people, right? You'd be like, oh wow, there's a line in the poet Rebecca Wolf has a line, the stink of the mid-'80s is on you and there's nothing you can do. I'm like, oh my God. I know like a lot of people about whom one can say that. And that could be said about any of us at a certain point, right? The stink of the mid-20th century is on this one and of the early 21st century is on that one. So,
yeah.
Yes.
All right, thanks for such a mind-blowing, beautiful presentation. I enjoyed it extremely. I would like just to have a follow-up question. It's very interesting to think about the poets, that they are sort of audience conscious, and perhaps they also enter into dialogue with one another. But I would like to ask about another aspect, like the 9/11 thing, because there was this like great swing in sort of American mood. So, do you think would there be something like to talk about the general consciousness, like the reflection on the mood, like no more sort of strong American boasting spirit, or the change of the moods? Is it really visible with these poets?
I think it's interesting because your question also kind of links up with Justin's too. I mean, I think you don't. I mean, it's interesting. I don't think they're. You might say, where did triumphalism go, in American poetry? And if you think about Whitmanian triumphalism, it's a generous triumphalism, right? That's one way to think about it. And it's like, anything available to me is available to you. Get on my Whitman train. We're all heading to the future together. I will, and I think that strain, that generous, inclusive strain, and what you can also see is typical American, I can eat the universe, right? That's the ideological critique of Whitman. That continues, and that's a wonderful strain, and that's, through Ginsberg. I think Dickman is in that line, trying to kind of survey, include, and somebody like Dickman is trying to keep doing that post 9/11. But I do think there is, one thing, just looking at a lot of books I have on hand or knew of or went back to, there is a real sense of a mood shift, and also, it's like, it's a real downer. Like a lot of it's a real downer. And there are very strong, serious comic poets in America. But I think it's interesting that I was at some party and some guy was saying something like the 90s, they were so great, and he had this aria about how wonderful the 90s were, and it's wow. So and that was a sense of now that period looks so privileged and sustained and buoyant, and there weren't yet massive economic crashes. The most people were worrying about, if they were middle class enough, was like Monica Lewinsky and cigars, right? That's what they were worried about. And if you look back on that, you think, my God, that's what people were worried about, maybe stupidly, right? And so I think, yes, there has been a mood shift. But that would be a statistical, you'd have to go in and check. The other thing too is, because I was responding to the conference title, one of the things that got very minimalized in this talk was, this whole other aspect of work, both in these poets' work and in other poets, of these, intimate or domestic or not, But one of the things I think is interesting is, even in the most intimate poems, you'll get these eruptions of things. And you can't, a lot of these poets are very aware that you can't separate the private from the public in any easy way. And they want their poetry to register that. So,
All right. Well, I think that in a way we can go on with the panel discussion. Even questions, relating to what Maureen was talking about, what we have been thinking about as we were listening to each other and to the speakers. And so to proceed with the day, let's have a coffee and be back in 10-15 minutes.
No,
what really benefits to
I wondered whether I should talk about this, but must be something in your life.
Maybe it's just because of the rain.
She's really great. She was really great.
Yeah, it was great. It was really, it was definitely an interesting talk.
Is your work with poetry, remind you?
Yes.
Oh, contemporary or like novel, so 50s?
Post-war, post-World War II, basically.
As in? And
What's that?
as in?
Well, I'm doing my PhD on anthologies in post-World War II poetry, but
Then you should get in touch with a very good friend of mine, Alan Golding, who's, you know, Golding, Alan Golding.
I don't know.
He's based in Louisville. He's done, important work with modernism and with magazines, but also on like poets.
Okay.
And actually, I think he has done quite a lot of the idea of anthologies and apologizing going forward. Someone else in France.
Yes.
I got it, read it out.
Yeah, sure. So I teach at Charles University and Anglo-American University.
I should say that. Anglo-American. Well, an editor or something else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I edited an anthology of Prague poems called From a Terrace in Prague. It was 16 languages in translation.
What's the name?
From a Terrace in Prague.
Terrace.
Terrace. Mhm.
From a terrace.
Terrace in Prague. It's from a Platini poem.
Okay.
And
And it's like 16 languages and
Mhm.
translate. So it's like language and translate.
it's in English. No, it's just in English, but it's kind of a study as well with long introductions. And I'm working with Justin Quinn in my PhD. That is relevant. Oh, there you go. There you go.
That's what I was.
But it's all one, we do not get any qualifications, so it's just normal basic stuff, which I don't know.
Velení, předávám paní kolegyni Svěřku.
Yeah, so this is very old, really. But so
That's what I thought.
How do you know?
Body